Okay, Joel Wendt here. More frank talk on the redemption of Eros and related stuff. As I indicated earlier, we're going to take a spiritual orientation toward this material, and people can get confused about that because they might think it's a religious orientation. And I'm actually, if you understood the kind of work that I'm doing, you would maybe appreciate that I call myself a scientist of the spirit. I want to remain objective, but I do have a certain problem in that a lot of the words that we use and the way we think in modern culture is based on certain kinds of assumptions. And many people will carry these assumptions around in their head to a certain degree. And the basic assumption that we get from natural science is that there's only matter. There is no spirit. So when the human being is talked about, when the images of the human being are presented to us in the popular press, whether it's somebody, quoting a scientist with his latest experimental research on consciousness, or talking to a psychologist who uses evolutionary psychology in the basis of his understanding of human beings, we'll find latent in all those dialogues this basic idea, which is that the human being is just matter and not spirit, and we can understand everything about the human being from that point of view. Well, my basic approach to life has been that that's not true, and nevertheless I can understand in people coming to this that with justification they want more than just my saying that there is spirit and spirit is real. At the same time, in order to do that and remain sort of within the realm of reason, one must make observations, and that's where the problem starts, because when you make observations and you want to communicate your observations, you use language, and most of our language is laden with the idea that we're only matter and not spirit. So when we talk about the mind, for example, most people think brain. Well, I'm not going to do that, and I hope that the listeners of this will bear with me as we try to get deeper into the new feminine mysteries of Eros, and we'll just have to see. Now, the first thing that I'm going to talk about here is what we might call the three-body structure, three-body form structure of the organism of the human being. And of course, one of the basic background ideas is that the human being is created to love, and that's this higher principle that exists within our evolution. And we're not created to be what the social Darwinists seem to think at one time. The idea of survival of the fittest is a misperception of the actual facts. And let's talk about that a little bit, because there's something that should be at least stated, although at this point we're only going to get into that kind of coming at it sideways. But the fact is when the natural scientist goes out and he looks at nature, he can bring with him assumptions that he doesn't even know that he's decided to have. And in the work of Darwin, and also in the work of natural science prior to him, we have these assumptions sort of building up within the mind of scientists. And when they look at the world, they see what they see through the veil of their assumptions, which lie in the subconscious element of their thinking. And they interpret then what they see according to that. So they go out into the world, for example, the natural scientist, and he will see what goes on in nature, and he'll describe it as a struggle for survival. He will see their death and all manner of other things, and he'll call it a struggle for survival. But that's not the only point of view that one can have. If you were to, for example, go into Native American Aboriginal cultures, you would find that their perception of the world of nature, in which they lived far more intimately, far more interdependently than the natural scientist. The natural scientist is kind of, he's over here and nature is over here. For Aboriginal peoples, they're like entwined with it. And if you read Barfield, you can get ideas about participation and the onlooker separation and final participation, stuff like that. But the basic thing I want to point out here is when you live intimately with nature, you realize that nature is not competition. It's the opposite. It's cooperation. And the fact of death, for example, in nature is cooperation. It's the structure of nature to be cooperative in the sense that there has to be death and birth. That's the way it is, because this is how organisms proceed through holding their niche in the ecology. And this also means there's predators. There's a food chain. You know, microorganisms process things in the environment in order for the environment to have certain qualitative aspects. Plants process microorganisms in order to do the plant thing. Herbivores eat plants in order to transform that material into other things. Carnivores eat lower animals in order to transform that material into other things. But this is not a competition, it's a cooperation, because you have to not look at the parts, but the whole. And that's the way Aboriginal peoples thought about these things. They thought about it in terms of wholes, not parts. And this is one of the biases that's in natural science, is this tendency to divide and make distinctions. And this is what we talked about with the cross of love, to understand that one can have distinctions without differences. And what natural science does is it takes all distinctions and turns them into differences, when reality is actually different. And it's just a question of the relationship of your mind to phenomenon and to experience. So we're going to back up a little bit in our discussions of Eros, and we're going to use some of the older terms that people had. And yet we're going to do that in a way where what I do is I don't make you believe in soul and spirit. That's not what I'm going to do here. The three body structure thing is got soul, spirit, and body, but it's based on phenomenology. It's based on observation. It's based on giving a label to what you see and experience. Okay? It's a fairly simple thing on the one hand, but in terms of understanding that human beings are on a path to unfold from themselves the fact that the basic structure of what we are is a divine instrument of love. And this is what the new mysteries of Eros are about, understanding that we are a divine instrument of love. And again, as I said previously, you don't have to go outside of your own experience, because this is exactly what goes on between parents and children and teachers and children and all kinds of places in the social environment of humanity. People actually do not act like competitors in the jungle, which is the idea that we get from certain aspects of natural science. They don't actually act that way. They sacrifice themselves for the benefit of their offspring. And you could say, well, that's all got to do with da-da-da-da-da, but that's just the interpretation. The interpretation is biased already, and the scientist doesn't even know he lives in the bias. You want to read about that, read The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. Let's pause.